What's going on, YouTube? I've had a lot of my subscribers want me to share more of my stories about deployments and whatnot. So I thought I'd do a little video talking about my 2003 Iraq invasion deployment. And you know, if this one's relatively successful, I might do another one about my follow-on deployment in 2004 in Jaffa, Iraq. And you know, possibly even my third deployment in Afghanistan. But anyway, starting out, I'm going to talk about my first deployment, which was, like I said, the 2003 Iraq invasion. And what I've got laid out here is pretty much the gear that I carried and had during that time. Now, while some of the stuff is original, stuff that I still had, stuff I wore during that deployment, other stuff I had to go out and buy on my own to replace because I had to turn it in back to supply when I got back to the States. This is the utility, the exact actual camis that I wore during the invasion. Now, I was obviously issued more than one set, but this is one of the sets I had, and as you can see, they're pretty worn. The overwhelming majority of Marines had tricolor desert camis. You will see, if you look at some photos and whatnot during the invasion, you'll see like a sprinkle of guys that were actually wearing, you know, the desert digital camis. For the most part, though, those are guys that were issued those in recruit training, and they were pretty much the only guys that had those. So the overwhelming majority of us still had the tricolor desert camis, and the same was true on my second deployment in 2004. For the most part, we still had the tricolor desert camis. Let's see. So my boonie, so one of my issued boonies that I wore on deployment, and if you look right here, this is one of the things that a lot of Marines did is they would write, you know, on black Sharpie and whatnot around the inner rim, the places they've been on deployment. Now, that was the idea with this one, and unfortunately, you know, this boonie only saw one tour, so it didn't get additional things written on it. But moving on, so these are the actual gloves that I wore during the invasion. Now, if you ever wore Nomex flag gloves, you know that the fingertips blow out. So what I did is, once that happened, I just cut off the ends. But these were the actual Nomex flag gloves that I wore during the 2003 invasion, in pretty much the entirety of the deployment. So, weapons. Now, I've already talked about I was a machine gunner. So, for the most part, my primary weapon was an M240 Golf during the invasion. Now, a team leader would have had a M16A2 service rifle. And if you were a regular infantryman, rifleman, or a team leader, or a assistant automatic rifleman or whatnot, you would have had an M16A2. Team leaders had M16A2s with M203s attached to them, but the primary service rifle for a Marine infantryman was an M16A2. M4s were just few and far between. You pretty much had to be some Ricky Recon guy to have an M4 during those times. Okay, talking about the knives. So this was the issued bayonet at the time, the skinny, you know, pig sticker here. This is the same type of bayonet they had in Vietnam, and we continue to use this through the, Iraq invasion. It was eventually replaced by the current issue Marine bayonet, which we ended up getting in 2004. And taking on my second deployment, we had the newer bayonets, but this is the one we carried during the actual 03 invasion. So this right here, this little jewel, is my K-bar knife, and I've had this through 3 deployments. I bought this at the School of Infantry, and I've had this literally every deployment I've ever been on. So I stand by K-bar 110%. This is the actual leg sheath that I wore during the deployment, and what I did is I cut a lashing strap that was issued with the Molly 2 main pack, and I rigged it up to this, and I wore this around my leg. So obviously I don't use this sheath anymore. It actually sits in a display case upstairs in my little man cave, but this is the actual sheath that I wore on deployment. Let's see. This is the M9 pistol. This is the secondary pistol that I would have had on me as a gunner. So as a primary weapon, I had M240 Golf medium machine gun. As a secondary, I would have carried a pistol just like this, M9 service pistol, just in a holster, and you know, that would have been a backup. And actually, when we were in Saddam City, we actually had to go in and clear some rooms, and I remember slinging my M240 and pulling that out, so that, you know, it was more maneuverable and whatnot. as far as gear, the primary body armor was the interceptor vest. Now, this is obviously since thus been replaced, and this is kind of the entry level into Mali, you know, which kind of paved the way for that system, types of system. But essentially, it was a vest. You had a throat collar and a groin protector. Now, the vast majority of us did not wear the throat and groin protectors. We took those off. It was kind of a command designated thing. I'm sure if you wanted to, you could have worn it, but for the most part, most of us chose not to wear it. But you know, it has a collar, and it had a pocket for a front and back SAPI plate. Now, here's a little interesting story that a lot of people probably don't know is, at least in our unit, there wasn't a large supply of SAPI plates. So most of the guys wore medium SAPI plates. So all those guys that wore medium SAPI plates pretty much only had one SAPI plate that they wore in the front only. They didn't have a back SAPI plate. I was fortunate. I wore a large SAPI plate, so I actually went into combat with two SAPI plates. But the overwhelming majority of us, in our unit anyways, only had one SAPI plate, and that was in the front. In those days, deuce gear was still pretty much predominantly worn. So this was the standard issue deuce gear of the day. And you would wear this over your interceptor vest. So you had your, you know, it's just a Mali vest that, you know, there was no padding on the shoulders because, again, it was designed to be worn over the interceptor vest. Now, let's see, you got your mag pouches in the front. In the back here, we still had, at the time, we still had regular, you know, these type of Alice type canteen pouches. At least in the Marine Corps, we did not have, for the most part, the newer Mali 2 pouches yet. There was it's hard to see, but there's these little Mali adapters that you'd put on, and it enable you to use the Alice clips. The butt pack is this is very type of butt pack. And this butt pack, I remember, we would put this on our patrol pack, on the very bottom of our patrol pack, and inside it would be the mop boots. And anytime Saddam launched a scud at us, we'd have to batten the hatches of the AAVs, and we'd have to go to mop level 4. So, you know, don and clear the mask, and it was very miserable because we'd all be cramped inside that AAV, which is already loaded down with small arms ammunition inside it, and it was a miserable time. And like I said, early on in the early days, every time Saddam launched a scud, you know, they'd have to close those hatches, and we'd just sit there until we got the all clear. So it's like a sauna in there. Warming layers. This is the warming layer of the time. This is the, you know, fleece. We still issue a fleece just like this in the Marine Corps nowadays. It's coyote tan. But this is the original one that, you know, the overwhelming majority of Marines had during the invasion, was this forest green type fleece. Our Gore-Tex was the wetland style Gore-Tex, just like this. And this was predominantly, you know, just put inside your main pack. You know, I don't think I don't recall any time of us getting rained on during the actual invasion, but you know, I'm sure it happened. Gloves, in addition to the Nomex black gloves that I wore, you know, you had the black leather gloves with the, you know, the OD green glove liners. So, a couple other things. This is a shirt I wore during 03 invasion. As you can see, it's worn out, but it's 1st Battalion 4th Marines logo shirt. So I thought that was cool. Put that out on display. Also, you know, Marines are notorious. They probably do in the Army too, but anytime you go somewhere, any units you're with, you know, you always have like a deployment t-shirt or whatnot. So this was actually the shirt that, you know, we all got after the deployment. Our call sign was Pale Rider for our 1st Battalion 4th Marines. So, you know, we had the Pale Rider death horses and whatnot. So, good stuff. Boots were these tan jungle style boots, and these are the exact boots that I wore for all the way to the end of my deployment. and I will zoom in on these. You guys will see these things are freaking destroyed, and it's unfortunate, but you know, I was wearing these all the way to the end, and so were, you know, all the other guys. We were wearing boots just like this that were blown out, ripped, and everything else. And it's funny is we finally got new boots when we were in Kuwait getting ready to get on buses to go back to the States. They wanted us to look nice when we got back. But we wore these, you know, effed up boots the whole entire deployment. We were there in Iraq our first time around. So on these, and all the sand and everything on these, this is all freaking Iraq dust here. These suckers, I put these in the sea bag, and as soon as I got back from deployment, they went in a box. And then I finally, you know, when I finally made like a display case and whatnot, they went into the display case. So they still have sweat marks, sand, dirt, all kinds of crap. That's all from Iraq. Anyways, on these boots, you can see I've got my everybody had their blood type written on the top of the boot, and we still do that in the Marine Corps for the most part. And I don't have it in there right now, but our dog tag went right here in the boot, and that way, you know, God forbid if anything happened, like let's say you run a helicopter and the helicopter went down and all that's left is your foot, and it's all fine. They can at least identify that you were in there. So moving on, Kevlar. So, you know, we didn't have all this high-speed, you know, helmets and rails and crap, all that stuff that you have on helmets nowadays. So the Kevlar I had was the same one that, you know, guys that were in the Gulf War back in '91 had. Inside was a leather liner, and you know, I had one of these little foam pads that you bought at the PX, and inside underneath this foam pad is, you know, a regular webbing. So, and this is the old school Kevlar, and that's what we all had during the initial invasion. So helmet cover was a tricolor. The goggles that we were issued were the sun wind goggles, and these are the actual goggles that I had on deployment. So as you can see, I had a tan, or not a tan, but a tinted lens. And then this sock right here is just that's exactly what it is. It's the black sock that you cut, and you put it over your goggles to reduce the glare that your goggles would make. So that was it. We would have a black reflective glint tape on the top of these, so that, you know, aircraft overhead could easier to identify us and whatnot. Additionally, we would have a name tape sewn right here on the back, and for, you know, I don't have a name tape on it right now, but so there'd be a name tape right here, and that way, you know, if you're laying down on the prone or whatnot, somebody came up behind you, they can see your name tape here. This is the same Ranger band I believe I had on deployment as well. So, you know, this is got a lot of items still. Zoom in on these boots here. You know, as you can see, these things have blown out. They're extremely worn down, and this is the best part right here. You can see that, like, literally my foot would have been hanging out on the end, but you know, it's hard to believe that, you know, these things were still being worn. But you know, day in, day out, wore these the whole entire first deployment, and like I said, we didn't get new ones until we got to Kuwait getting ready to come home. A couple other things. So going into Iraq, you know, prior to the invasion, you know, a lot of people, they're so, let's see, how do I put this? When people think of the Iraq War, they think about, you know, the Iraq War after the invasion. So people don't think about, you know, the fact that we went up against the Republican Guard, the Iraqi army, you know, which had tanks and armored personnel carriers and jets and, you know, helicopters and everything else. You know, people have in their mind the Iraq War being against insurgents and whatnot. So, you know, a lot of people have forgotten that we were going up against the actual Iraqi army. So here's a, you know, when we were on ship, going to Kuwait, prior to the invasion kicking off, this is one of the field manuals that, you know, were handed out, and this pretty much just goes over, you know, some of the things about Iraq, their formations and, you know, different intelligence type stuff, and also has different types of enemy armor in there. So there's like BMPs, T-55s, T-62s, 72s, and different types of tanks that you know, the Iraqi army utilized at the time. So it's pretty good, cool little reference. But you know, this is the kind of stuff that they were giving us prior to the invasion kicking off. You know, their artillery pieces and whatnot, enemy threat armor. So all kinds of stuff, helicopters. Anyways, cool little thing. There's a little piece of gear. I remember buying this in Kuwait, but this is a recon wrap. These things have been around for a long time, and I bought this at a Kuwaiti PX, and I wore this for both deployments, and it's still going strong. I still wear it today. But I've had this thing, man, I've had this thing forever. This is a great piece of little gear. Here's a few Saddam currency, if you guys have ever seen these before. But obviously he put his face on everything, sure loved himself.